Hey everyone, welcome back to Coding from Null. This week we are going to start digging into exactly what React hooks are and how they're useful. Now, a good way for us to learn that, in my opinion, is up till now we've built our application using a bunch of class components. And what we're going to do now is take those and convert them into functional components and use React hooks to maintain the same level of functionality. So really excited about this one. Let's go ahead and jump in.
All right, so let's start switching our class components that we have. We're going to be changing these three here, our countdown, our subscribe, and our notification from class components over to functional components, which will, I think, really help you understand how hooks are used and how they can kind of actually clean up our code and make it a little bit easier. So just kind of a brief overview before we get started. Hooks basically allows us to hook into the React runtime to access some of the functionality that we wouldn't normally have in functional components, that we normally have in class components. I'll explain that a little bit more. This one is the notification component is going to be really simple to change. We're actually not going to be touching hooks really at all. It's going to be a very simple change. We can just take this component out here and we're just going to switch this into just a function. So we'll just call this const notification is equal to an arrow function, and then we can take this render method out. And instead of saying this.props.level, this.props all throughout here, we can simplify this and just destructure our props right here into, what do we have? We've got level, we've got visible, and we have source and alt and message. And so we can just destructure all of those. And if we just go Control H and we find all the instances of this dot props dot, and we'll just replace it with nothing. It should work. Just replace, and then I'll go ahead and I'm using Prettier here, and I'll just format the document so it looks nice and clean. And that's pretty much it for the notification one. Real simple. We're just destructuring our props here, and then just returning just a normal function that's just returning JSX. So this really doesn't touch hooks at all. It just kind of gives you an idea of how to convert a class component to a functional component and some of the things that you come across. So the next one that we'll hit on is subscribe. And so there's a few things here that we'll need to get started. So the first thing here is, so let's go ahead and just change this component here, because we're not going to be using a class component anymore. And we'll say use state. Now this use state is a hook that allows us to use state in a functional component, which we would normally not have state in. It would be a stateless functional component. So we're able to actually still set state and stuff like that, which we will go into. So again, we're just going to change this here to a function. So we'll just say const subscribe is equal to, and then just an arrow function. And I think we've got some props here. We've got, so we've got configure notification, we've got show notification. These are all, these three are all actual functions that we're passing. So we have configure notification, And we've got show notification, and we've got change logo speed. And we also have a placeholder for the input and the button text for the text of the button. So we'll just go ahead and destructure all that. And we can do the same thing here as we did with the last one. We can find all the instances of this.props and then just change those over to just the name of the prop itself. So we have, okay, and so we can get rid of this here as well. Let's go ahead and get rid of the render method. We don't need that anymore. And just see how it's just cleaning up a lot of the kind of unnecessary complexity that we generally have in class components. So here what we're going to do is how we access state. And for this use state hook, we'll say const. And what use state returns to us is an array. And the first thing of that array is the initial state. And then the second thing is like an updater function to actually update the state. So what we're going to do is just destructure that array into state and set state. So it looks real similar to what you would normally have like in our class components, where we have this.setState, but we won't be using this because we don't have access to this in this context for functional components. So it'll just be set state. The thing with this here is that really I could, since this is just an email that we have, I could just name the state email and then set email. Or whatever you want. You can really name this whatever you want. The idea is that this then is your state variable, and then this is your updater function. I'm just going to leave it as state and set state just for a little bit of clarity as we kind of go through this. And then we'll equal this to use state. And we're just setting the initial state. So whatever object we pass to use state is going to set the initial state. It's going to return that state and the updater function. And we're just setting our initial state to email of an empty string. And that's pretty much it. So now all these instances, you'll see these are, we'll say these are declared but never read. And that's because we're using this down here for this.state and this.setState, which we can change. So we will just come in here and say this.state, and we'll just replace that with state. So we've got 3 instances of that. And so now we can see that we are now using this state variable. And we'll do the same thing for set state. And change this down here to set state. I think that looks right. Place all. And we have a couple more things here. So again, remember we don't have this, the idea of this in the functional components. So we need to declare our functions here that we weren't having to declare before. So here we'll just say const handle change and say const handle submit. And then down here we need to take the this off of these so that it will actually run those functions. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and format this real quick so it looks a little better. I know it's complaining at me. So we should be good here. We might run into some errors as we run this thing. I might not have caught everything, but that's pretty much the general idea. Is that we can just use the use state hook to kind of just mimic what we've already been doing, but in a just more cleaner and straightforward fashion, and clean up kind of some of the unnecessary code that we have in here. So now we're going to kind of step one level deeper, and we're going to look into not only use state, but also another hook that's called use effect. And we will go into that as we switch over the countdown component. So if we come up here in the countdown, we are going to need both use state and use effect. Now, what use effect allows us to do is create side effects. So side effects that we want to run whenever our component is re-rendered. So you can really think of like we have some of our lifecycle methods like component did mount, component will mount. Those sort of things are basically encapsulated kind of in use effect. In fact, if you look up the documentation on React, it will tell you that use state is basically kind of three of those of these functions kind of rolled into one, and I can't remember exactly which ones they are. I think it's component did mount, component will mount, and something. It's three of them basically, and it basically takes those lifecycle methods and allows you to kind of compose those into one, and then just apply side effects so that whenever that component re-renders to the page, you can do something. And we will be using that in this component here. Another thing that we want is we want to set the interval and stuff, which can be kind of messy in hooks themselves. It can kind of cause some trouble. So we're actually going to be using another hook for that that's not necessarily in React, but another hook that was written to handle using an interval with hooks, and it's called use interval. And it's just kind of a very that's just kind of the naming convention with hooks is use and then whatever the basically the thing is that you're using. So in our client directory, we're going to need to install that that use interval hook, and we will say npm I, and then it is called React use interval. And again, this will just allow us to cleanly set the interval and then allow it to sort of clean up any of that mess that can be left. Like here, when we have to clean up the interval here, we actually clear the interval. We're not going to have to do that because this hook is going to kind of take care of some of that that sort of mess for us. So let's go ahead and just kind of start hacking away at this while we install that use interval hook. So again, here we'll just say const countdown is equal to, and give us a function here. And so what I want to do here is actually destructure, and I'm going to call this countdown date. And I know we're calling this future date down here, but there was some naming conflicts that we would run into, so I ended up changing this name to countdown date up here. And so if we come into our state, again, we're going to use that state hook, so we'll say const and destructure the state, and the set state updater function, and we will call use state, and then pass it this object as our initial state. Again, we've got to convert these functions. I'm going to just convert this to an arrow function, make it nice and clean here. It's equal to value, and that's a little arrow function here. Set countdown. Also going to make into an arrow function here as well. And these we'll just kind of leave for now. Let's go ahead and pop that render function out of there. Delete one of these. And let's go ahead and clean up some of that, the set state stuffs, and this dot state, this dot set state. So we'll go ahead and replace that, and then find any instances of this dot state, and just change that to state. Replace. Okay, that's looking good. And this dot props dot future date will actually be, so this is where I was coming into a problem where, because we actually have this dot props dot future date here, but since we're destructuring it, so if I change this to future date, basically end up with a naming conflict because you have future date here and then also a future date variable in here, and it was causing some naming conflicts. So I just changed the prop name to countdown date, which made it a bit easier, so I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. So if we come down here and we'll change this to countdown date, the rest of this should stay the same. And now we need to get into using that use interval and use effect hooks. So if we come up here, what we want to do is import that use interval hook from React use interval. And come down here, and let's just go ahead and we're going to delete both of these. And instead, we're going to use the use interval hook to set the interval. So we'll say use interval, and you'll notice that this really mimics how we use interval itself, which is really nice. The function looks exactly the same. And so we will say set countdown and is this 1000, so every second. And notice how much cleaner that is than what we were having to do before, where we were having to set the interval and then run the function, and then on component, when the component unmounts, to then clear up that interval so we don't have any stuff laying around that we're not using anymore, and any resources that we're not using anymore. And this use interval will do all that for us, so we don't really have to worry about it, which is nice. And the next thing that we want to do is called use effect, because we want to, so this is going to fire every second. That's great. But we also want it to fire when the component first renders to the page, which we can use effect to do. We'll say use effect and then set countdown, which was kind of similar to what we did before. I think we were using component did mount and writing the function. Then we had another one that was we had, and then I think inside that we set the interval and then ran through it every second. This just kind of makes it a little bit cleaner in just kind of a little bit easier, nicer to read. We're just using use effect and use interval. Now our add zeros isn't being hit because we are saying this down here on add zeros. So go ahead and change that. And we should be sitting pretty good, I'm thinking. So I'm going to go ahead and format this. Go ahead and give it a save. And let's go ahead and just run this and see if we get any errors. We should be good. I think we caught everything and went over really how we can take those class components and then just convert them over to function components and use the hooks to maintain that same level of functionality, which is really nice and just makes your React application read a little bit better and isn't so clouded with a bunch of code that we don't necessarily need all the time, which is nice. So let's see. Don't have any errors here. Something is going on here with our countdown something's going on where we're not getting that countdown. So let's go ahead and look at that. So let's come into coming soon. I think this might be where we change that name of. So we're calling this countdown date. I don't know if this would really matter since we're passing that down anyway. But let's go ahead and just change this just in case. And, oh, yeah, we didn't change it here is the main problem. So let's go ahead and change that to countdown date. And just for the sake of everything is, named the same. Did I spell it all right? Countdown dates. And up here, countdown date. Go ahead and give that a save. And so there we go. Now we're getting it through. We just needed to change the name of that prop. And so now you can see that we have all that same functionality that we had before. And I do believe I have the server running right now, so I can actually test the something happened here. I think I have too much stuff running on my computer. It froze up on me. I'm going to go ahead and kill off some stuff real quick. And let's go back to localhost 3001. And bring this up here so we can see it. And so I should be able to. Yeah, something's going on with the subscribe. So let's go into subscribe and take a look here at when we're setting this state and stuff in this. All right, so what was happening here is that it took me some digging into, but so basically what was happening is the use effect and we are setting state on every time we were running this use effect, right? And it basically was just really bogging down the console and like setting a bunch of errors because it was stuck in kind of like this sort of infinite loop. So one way that you can get around that is just to make sure that use effect takes a second variable that's like is going to be parameters, which is going to check whether these have changed or not before it re-renders. That way it kind of stops it from like constantly re-rendering. And so now when we put that in there, we'll see that our app is now running smoothly like we had before. I can actually, I think I killed the server, so I can go ahead and start up this server again. Type in npm start on the server. Come back here, we'll do test at test.com. We should see, there we go. Now it's running exactly the way it was running before. So that's pretty much it for React hooks. I think it's definitely worth, again, there's going to be some things like we ran into here that it's not going to be an exact one-to-one between, class components and functional components. There's going to be some sort of tricky stuff we may have to do in amongst it. But it definitely, like I said, cleans things up a bit and just makes things a bit more readable. And you also get the added benefit of using other hooks that people have made, like the use interval hook that kind of like does a lot of work for us that we don't really need to worry about. So that's pretty much it for this week, and I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll see you all next week.